Welcome to my Bob Thurman podcast. I'm so grateful some good friends enabled me to present them to you. If you enjoy them and find them useful, please think of becoming a member of Tibet House US to help preserve Tibetan culture. Tibet House is the Dalai Lama's cultural center in America. All best wishes. Have a great day.
This is episode 273, Chicken and the Egg.
By talking about the Buddha, and not as a Buddhist. And actually, that's a famous topic of debate in Tibetan universities. Is the Buddha a Buddhist? And in one way, then you can argue it different ways. You can say yes, because they're from beginningless time. Oh, this is an important thing. In the Buddhist universe, there's no first beginning of the universe. The universe is, they don't take Genesis literally, either the Western version or any Indian version or Chinese version or any version. They don't take that too seriously. And they consider it like the solution to the chicken and egg problem is always another chicken and more eggs, just beginninglessly. It's silly. At first it was an egg and then a chicken came out, or first it was a chicken and then an egg came up. None of that makes any sense. And so it's an infinite regress into the past and a beginningless universe. And that's really very helpful, actually. It sort of relativizes any particular high priesthood demanding to say that the universe has a fixed start and they know what it is. And their God did it, or they did it, or whatever, some big bang, some scientist in a lab did it. And instead, it opens up infinitely toward the past. And once it opens up infinitely toward the past, then it goes on, it's logical that it will go on infinitely to the future. And that doesn't hurt you. It sort of, if you're very insecure and feel that some theory that proclaims itself as the absolute final dogmatic theory is though it must be so, and that you're comfortable knowing it, if you're like that, then you might feel lost, actually, if you don't have a first beginning and there's no fixed end. But once you get used to it, it's kind of cool. It doesn't change. It's like, for example, right now you're a finite being, you feel, but then you have a concept of infinity, and you also must be permeated by infinity, because if your finitude depended on not being permeated by infinity, infinity wouldn't be infinite. There would be one place it wasn't, and that was you, the finite being. There would be no infinity there, right? And that's clearly not possible. So in a sense, it's very logical that you are both finite and infinite. And it doesn't hurt your finitude. And even it might relax your sense of the sort of absoluteness of your boundary, and might make you feel a little more open and permeable to the world, which you are actually, because, for example, right now I'm inhaling, and you're inhaling, and what you're inhaling, what you want in what you're inhaling is the oxygen, the sort of energizing element, and that is the gift of the plants. The plants are giving that to you, and they have separated it from hydrogen and from water and from whatever, and they're giving you that oxygen which you need to nourish and energize your body. And then you expel, when you exhale, you expel the carbon. dioxide. And then the plants grab it. Hey, great, carbon. And they make themselves healthy, and they grow from that. So you're in a wonderful exchange, and your body is permeated by the gift of the plants, and you give them back something. Of course, if you give them back too much, then that clogs the whole system, right? Pollutes the system. But that's our great, wonderful planet that we have of interaction with the beloved plants who love us. They completely adore us. And we should really be nicer to them if we really realize they were the donors of our oxygen that we certainly can't do without, right? We have to breathe. Well, anyway, so I'm going to talk about Buddha in the sense that Buddha does describe this process. And he's very into lotuses and into plants. And he wants us to be aware when he attained enlightenment and he shooed away the devil. And his famous story, he was under a tree. And he placed his hand on the earth, touched the earth, and he called the earth to witness his interconnectedness to all of life and all of infinite reality. And this infinite connection was actually how he convinced the devil to leave him alone and to allow him to give his teaching. And so his from the beginning, the Buddha's teaching was the teaching of interconnection. You should realize that. And that interconnection is good. And that you should get away from any idea you have that Buddha's main message was that everything is horrible. In fact, that's the main message of most cultures, that you have to be very much afraid of things, and that you need such and such a God's protection, or such and such a leader's protection, the emperor, or the high priest, or the sorcerer, chief sorcerer, or whatever it is, that you can't, because you're in a very dangerous place, because life is very dangerous, and somehow we are interlopers here on this planet, and the planet doesn't really like us, and it's not adequate for our needs, and we have to remake it in some way, and so on, in order to be adequate. And these are all maybe not such good ideas, actually. And they make us feel insecure, and they make us feel unnecessarily paranoid. Fear, actually, on the other hand, is a good thing. Fear is not taught in Buddhist psychology, scientifically. It's not taught that fear is bad, because some things are harmful, like you should be afraid to take a knife and hack your hand with it, because it'll cut you, you'll bleed. And that's not good. So fear is a good cautionary thing. It's a part of your sensitivity. But unreasonable fear, paranoia, insecurity, anxiety, this is not helpful. So that's why the Buddha's first teaching was that the reality of the world is nirvana, is bliss, is freedom from suffering, is goodness. And the universe is all good if you really understand it, okay, which I harped on last time, but I'm coming back to it again. But anyway, I'm going to talk today about the issue of nothingness, because in order for us to take seriously the bardo in which we're living, and the bardo in which we will be after the moment of death, for which there is a definition in Buddhist science, it's not exactly the same as the flat line, if you think of that as the Western definition. It's not as the same in a brain, that is. It's not the same as the heart not beating, actually. It doesn't occur at the exact time that the heart stops beating. It somehow takes a little longer to actually die. And the death definition is when the super subtle, selfless soul mind continuum, which sometimes is called the indestructible drop, like a pretty little thing, like a drop, like a bindu, like a drop. Tigle, they call it in Tibetan, or a drop. Bindu in Sanskrit. Where that indestructible drop, but it's not a fixed thing. It's not like a barcode. It's not a personal thing that has your image printed in it, for example, or your DNA printed in it exactly as your DNA is at some particular moment, which of course is always changing a little bit. DNA does. but it's sort of a spiritual, it carries the spiritual DNA, you could say. And it's sort of not only mental, and it's not only physical. It's at a state of subtleness that is beyond the duality of mental and physical, but it sustains the duality, on the other hand, of mental and physical. When it proceeds, in its creativity, in its joy, in its pleasure, bliss, it sustains that. So this is again, some of you who are hardened Buddhists, perhaps from some schools, may be shocked because you have been interpreting, the Westerners have been interpreting for a long time, it's the selfless teaching of Buddha, the teaching of selflessness, anatma, or nairatmya, or non-self, as some people like to call it, although I don't like that. I call it selflessness better than non-self, I think. And they've been translating that or thinking of that as soullessness. And that was associated with Buddhism by people who were studying it early on in the 19th century, who were atheists and were trying to get away from being threatened by the version of God that they encountered as children in their churches that was threatening them with hellfire and all kinds of trouble. And so they wanted to get away from that. So they were thrilled to find something with something like a spiritual hygiene or something that they associate with religions. And they were thrilled to find that there was one that said there is no soul. And that's why people have been so stuck for the last few centuries. The Western Enlightenment, in other words, what's called the Western Enlightenment from the 17th century, following the Reformation, then you have the Enlightenment, and the Renaissance, Reformation, Enlightenment, you have those kind of terms. You all know that, got it in school. And the Enlightenment was that nature does not provide a soul for the human being, or even that the mind and the soul are not necessary, and that nature is a material process. And at the very beginning, maybe they thought there was a kind of God, like a deist, what they call deism, who got it going, but then dropped out, or took a long vacation, and just let the material of the universe, including the living beings who are material entities, just carry on, And so that's the Enlightenment, and it was a rebellion against the church in the West. And in a way, it was healthy, because people had been intimidated by the Inquisition and by, to be in fear for their soul, that there was some all-powerful being that was going to doom them if they didn't do exactly what the Pope or the high priest or the minister told them they should do, or the good book, the Bible, should do. And so that's why they have become so attached to that they have become themselves nowadays fanatics in teaching us that materialism is the way of the world, that's reality. And so we have to question that. This is the key to beginning Bardo, the way we get connected to the Bardo, to the between stages of the process of life, is we find in ourselves where we accepted that as children in school. We were maybe a little uncomfortable with it. We maybe went to church or synagogue or temple or something, and we thought, well, maybe there's something else. But when we got sick, we ran to the materialist doctor who said even vitamin C sucked. and just have to take their drug and their surgery. And when we think it's really real, we think, this is real, my body, me, is real. And we're taught that. And we're even taught desensitizing things in schools, like dissecting a living frog in a biology class. But it doesn't feel, it's an animal, doesn't feel. Only in the last decade, practically, other than Albert Schweitzer, the great Albert Schweitzer, scientists insisted that animals didn't have feelings. They didn't have sensitivity. They kind of insisted that. And which everyone knows by common sense is not true. So we've been put in a situation where our intuition sort of feels connected to things. It feels that things have a continuity. It feels that there's something subtler in the world than just the coarse matter. but we distrust those feelings. And we go with a concept that our destiny is nothing, that nothing is awaiting us, and that means death is the doorway into that nothingness, and that nothingness eradicates everything we did in life. And the good part of that eradication is that it eradicates whatever we did, the consequence of whatever we did that was bad. And that makes us a little bit psycho in our ability to be bad, actually, to cut off our own innate and intuitive dislike of being bad. Nobody likes to be bad, actually. And everyone goes, when someone else gets hurt around you, you feel bad by your mirror neurons that have been recently discovered. They discovered them in Italy. I think it's so wonderful. Up there between pasta meals and the Mediterranean diet, they discovered the mirror neurons in a neuroscience lab, which are where when you see something happen to somebody, you rehearse it as if it happened to you, which the wonderful, whatever his name is, Jeremy Rifkin, the wonderful Jeremy Rifkin, he wrote a wonderful book called Empathic Civilization that I highly recommend to you all. So this is key. So the key is that we feel science is authoritative, in other words. And science tells us that nothing is waiting for us. And I argued with my colleagues in the college who are the high priests of the academy nowadays, which are the natural scientists, they're called. And it's absolute anathema. It's heresy to consider that there's some sort of spirit or soul or thing. And they kind of like Buddhists, so I'm sorry, I kind of blew our cover because they think that we are the religion that doesn't have a soul, but that's false. We do. Even in Theravada Buddhism, the more simple sort of foundational level, there's something called the continuum of mind, chitta santana, which means that mind goes from life to life and mind continues. And then this becomes the Buddha nature in the Mahayana, or the Buddha essence, even the Buddha womb. And then in Vajrayana, it becomes the indestructible drop. And that's what we're talking about in the between state, in the sort of, which is the Vajrayana is part of the Mahayana, actually, really. Don't listen to people who tell you that Vajrayana is not the Mahayana, the universal vehicle, the non-dual vehicle. It is the non-dual vehicle, but it deals with the most subtle level of the non-dual. And it has a little bit of esoteric about it because you have to have certain prerequisite understandings and commitments to safely go into that super subtle level and discover your deeper energies, let's say. If you start discovering your deeper energies while you are being whipped around by your unconscious, when you haven't confronted it in a more at a certain level, then it could be in danger. It's dangerous for you. You could get out of control, and that's why it was esoteric. Okay, eros and thanatos in the unconscious that dear old Freud discovered. The erotic and the aggressive. Death and lust. They're there in everyone's unconscious. And if you become more aware with them, before you have a little bit of detachment from them, you're kind of in danger. You're endangering yourself. That's the only reason it was esoteric, okay? Now, why did I finally free myself from the scientists? Because I kept asking them questions. And then the question that finally was successful, and the one that I want you to meditate on, is you scientists, your method is to go by the facts. You go by what you find to be there as reality. Okay, so which one of you found nothing? Who was the discoverer of nothing? Did someone get a Nobel Prize in Stockholm in a tuxedo for having discovered nothing that then we know is part of reality, and therefore that's what we teach? Because we only teach, all theories, all scientific theories are hypotheses accounting for the evidence of what we have experienced to experiment or experience, and then they're awaiting falsification, and they're verified by more experience and more evidence and more experiment. And if some experiment and experience falsifies them, we have to modify the theory. So no theory is an absolute dogma. That's your scientific thing, right? So what was your experience of nothing? And who experienced it? Please say. And all I got is irritation. I even like to tease them, the ones who are more friendly, saying, did Carl Sagan show up at the Physics Association meeting in Chicago after he died and say, it's okay, guys, it's cool. I'm cool and calm and peaceful in nothing. And I don't exist, so I'm verifying that nothing is your destiny. And there's no teleology, there's no purpose in life. And there's no God, and there's no soul, and there's therefore no mind, really. Did Carl show up and tell you that after dying? Actually, well, obviously he couldn't have, because he'd be in nothing, they could say. But point is, there is no such thing as nothing, luckily. That's a big eureka thing. That's enlightenment. To really know that nothing is nothing. And another thing I love to do is with an audience like you guys, I might say, who's afraid of nothing? Or you can sneak up on them more by saying, who's afraid of nothingness? And then you see a bunch of hands, and people are more cautious. A few brave ones are existentialists. They go, yeah, I'm afraid of nothingness. And then I asked them if Rambo, a real life Rambo, sat up here on stage and said, I'm afraid of nothing, what would you think he meant? And of course, you'd think he meant he wasn't afraid. So nothing is nothing. And so no, it's impossible to be afraid of nothing. You're just afraid of what paranoia you're projecting, because nothing is nothing, so it can't hurt you. But this is really important. You think this is just semantic. It isn't. It's really important. And so I think you should meditate on it. Let's meditate now. I want you to meditate. And probably a lot of you know about basic mindfulness practice, satipatthana, focusing on your breathing, which is the beginning of focusing on the body, actually, because the breath is the kind of the bridge between mind and body in the Buddhist thing. So you just sort of withdraw from your different sense preoccupations and just inhale and exhale, and try not to inhale extra deeply. Try not to exhale extra strongly. Just let it go ahead naturally. And you just do that to start with, just to calm down. And then you meditate on nothing. Once you get going a little bit and calming a little bit, take the object of your meditation to be nothing. And when you do that, you may come to think of a sort of black or dark space, blank space, but dark blank space. So a black space. But then you kind of realize, if you have a picture in your mind of a black space or a blank space, that's not nothing, because it's space. So you could imagine a Buddha sitting in it, or you could imagine yourself sitting in it, and you couldn't be sitting in nothing, because nothing would be neither space nor time. It's not an object, actually. So actually, you're setting yourself an impossible goal when you think of meditating on nothing, because nothing is nothing. So it's neither light nor dark. It's neither space nor impenetrability, the opposite of space, something crowding. And so you realize that it can't be something to fear. And you just kind of focus on that and calm yourself. And you've maybe had moments in your life where you might, there is an expression we say, oh, you think I'm just nothing? And so you're mad at someone, or someone's mad at you, or they're insulting you, or accusing you, or disregarding you. You say, you treat me like I'm nothing. So we do associate it with something negative. But it's not really negative, because it isn't there. So it's not the opposite of something, except as a verbal term. And then, so when we fall asleep, I hope you did that meditation last night. When you fall asleep, you kind of let go of your consciousness. Blessed rest. And it's a kind of a nice slide. But if you're very, very mindful, and dear Judith, a little bit maybe has that problem that you're afraid, because you feel maybe you never wake up again. So you kind of feel that you're losing control of your condition, yourself, your boundary. You're functioning as a body. And so you're frightened of that thing, so you need something to help you go past that hump. But that can't be nothing that is frightening you, because you can't be in nothing. You can't go into nothing. You can't be stuck in it, because it isn't anything. A dark space is a dark space, which is not nothing. So obviously, when I say to the scientist, show me the experience of nothing who discovered it? What makes it a piece of scientific data that it exists? Nothing exists. Before the Big Bang, there was nothing. They'll say that, those guys. And that's ridiculous. There was no nothing before, because there never is nothing. That's the one thing there never is. That's why we call it nothing. So there was always something before any Big Bang, or Big Crunch, or Little Crunch, or Bang, or whatever it is. There's always something. Chicken and egg, going back endlessly is fine, it doesn't bother us. If we're just a chicken or an egg going forward, it does bother us. We want to be human being. We want to be Buddha. We want to be a field of egg of bliss. We don't want to just be chicken and egg. So that could be a problem, but not going backward. Now, as you're meditating this, your mind will wander. Especially because you're beginning to realize you can't find any object that is nothing to focus on. You know, abhava upasana. Upasana means focus, not foundation, by the way. Focus. Focus on. You can't focus. So then your mind is, why is he asking me to do this? It's obvious. I know that, blah, blah. But then you stop to think about your picture of death, your picture of unconsciousness, your picture of empty space out there between the solar system, between the stars and the galaxy. You feel that sort of nothingness. So you think there is a nothingness, although you know that light goes through it, and so it's actually space. But anyway, you think of it as nothingness. And you feel that you're going to be nothing. And a lot of us feel we are nothing, actually. Why we're depressed. Why is depression so huge? Because the high priests, the arbiters of reality, the authorities on what is reality in our backward culture tell us that nothing is the final reality. It's kind of the foundation of everything, and we revert to it when we die. And we're already there in the sense that our sense of being a subjectivity, a presence, a person, having a mind or even a soul is something, is an illusion. It's just wetware. It's just an illusion in a computer, a biological computer. And we're already nothing, actually. And that's why materialists, Sam Harris and others, and a lot of other writers lately wrote popular books, excoriating religions for having crazy ideas and causing a lot of war and violence by some dogmatic, fanatic theory like, God is with us, charge, and they can have that's correct in a way, that happened, but they kind of inconveniently, for their thesis, they left out Stalin and Mao and total atheists who consider people to be spiritually nothing and themselves to be spiritually nothing, which is why they like to remain drunk most of the time. So they felt like nothing, so they felt comfortable as nothing. They were incredibly destructive because, in a way, the blind faith in nothing as your final reality is the most rigid form of blind faith because it's so desperate, because it completely contradicts the intuition of everyone that everything is something. Everyone knows that. Even the law of thermodynamics, energy may go into entropy, like be scattered and diffused, but they never can become nothing. They know that in a theory. But we have an image of everything being nothing. And this has created this backward civilization of the industrialized world that is wrecking the world and ends up as self-destructive. But it doesn't matter because it's all nothing, right? And that's why it isn't a frog in a boiling pot, that doesn't really care because it's too far away. We are capable of long-term planning and avoiding long-term dangers and difficulties. We do it all the time. But we just don't go beyond this life for ourselves. And we fanatically stay on this, that we're going to be nothing, so we won't be there. So we love our kids and our grandkids, but secretly, at least I won't be there. We never admit that to ourselves because we wouldn't want our kids to think that we are like that. Actually, we want them to be like that because we send them off to materialist school to be taught. So it's actually very strong self-contradictory thing to be a blind faith believer in nothing. Because there's no nothing. Everyone knows. So this is really key. And then you hit this one and you find in yourself a kind of devil-may-care attitude about yourself and about life. An inattentive, a little bit disconnected sense about yourself and life. And you'll find this is the circuit breaker. This is the psycho-neurological, philosophical, scientific, spiritual circuit breaker deep in the core of your being, is that you don't really have to worry. It doesn't matter. It all won't matter ultimately. It all doesn't matter. That means it's all nothing. Do you get it? Okay, so ding, that's the first meditation. I know I kept talking during it, but it was a guided meditation. Don't be mad, please. So that's really, really key. And the Buddha completely got that. And, but you can see how Buddhism could be distorted by materialists, of which there are many. Because Buddha taught selflessness and emptiness. And then they thought, emptiness, good. He was hip to nothingness for long before us. So then, he's very scientific. That's great. He agrees with us materialists. No, he doesn't. Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness at all. In fact, one of the most important emptinesses is the emptiness of nothingness, which in a way means that nothing is empty of being any kind of thing in itself. And what it is only, it's an interrelated concept depending on the concept of something. So that nothing is the thing that isn't there, and something is all the things that are there. And all those things that are there are empty, which means they are not separate from nothing. and or because they don't need to, because nothing isn't there, so you don't. There's no question of being separate. So they are only interconnecting with other things. They're all relational. Emptiness really means relativity. It doesn't mean nothingness, as the materialist Buddhists will definitely want to say. They'll argue with me when I'm saying this, just as strongly as the scientists, as the net material scientists, scientific materialists will. But you will, they'll argue with us. You have seen it now. You have thought about it. And it's so simple. Nothing is nothing. Eureka. It's not a place. It's not a destination. It's not a location. Nothing to fear. And emptiness is the balm for the fear of nothingness, as well as the balm for the fear of any absolute somethingness. That balm means everything is related. Everything is relative. Absolute relativity, if you will. Which means you are interconnected with everything. And then the more you become aware, and the more you expand your feeling of interconnection, the more you realize that everything is this, what we call clear light of emptiness. It's this boundless infinite energy that is just there, wanting to serve us, to help us, to embrace us, to nourish us, to sustain us. And death is when we touch it, actually, most deeply. But we touch it all the time. We don't know that we touch it all the time because the toucher is it already. We're made of it. It's the infinite energy of life. But when we sort of get close to it is when we get so bountiful in our contact of life, we don't need to depend on the one particular continuum of life, like a particular body. But that's not because our body becomes nothing, it's because our body temporarily becomes everything. We melt into all of it, blissfully. Okay, I know I'm jumping ahead there. Okay, now, but this is very important. You know, otherwise it's just a play, but playing is also good. But it's just a play, you know. Oh yeah, I want to worry about future life. I believe, maybe I was Cleopatra in last life, or Mark Antony, or Romeo, or I don't know, that's someone happier, you know, Don Juan or whatever, and you know. But when you were brought up as a materialist in our modern industrial culture. Now you can't just say Western nowadays; it's global, worldwide. Then at a deeper level, you're not really committed to your interconnectedness. Because if you're really connected to your interconnectedness, you're automatically totally cheered up. You're not afraid of death. You realize death is itself like nothing, actually. And that's the death of death. And so death becomes the substance of infinite life, something like that. Anyway, so that's a more broad, and you get it, and you confidently move toward that on the basis of scientific discovery. You know, because actually Buddha did discover nothing in the sense that he realized it wasn't there. And he then discovered emptiness, which was the realization that everything is there as interconnected with everything else. And our experience of everything, ourself and every other, as if it were separate from, and each one was an independent sort of self-subsistent, intrinsically real, absolute thing in its separation, is completely illusory. It's like someone who gets so into Avengers Endgame and the battle with Thanos that they practically feel it themselves when Iron Man gets killed. They die. I hate that they killed off Iron Man. I really do. I'm sorry. I didn't like it. Since I was a small child, I'm a very silly person. I don't like tragedies. I don't like unhappy endings. I resist them and refuse them. I always rewrite the endings of. I shout at screens and things when I'm not irritating other people. I'm watching something semi-alone or in good company, but then they try to shut me up. But anyway, I hate it. The other day, there was a young man in a French village, and a young lady was so in love. But then he was being dragged off to sea by somebody, and then they were going to get married, and they made love, and then he ran out to sea anyway, and she pushed him to go off in her own nervousness about it, and then she was reduced in the village in a terrible way. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, yeah, terrible. How can they end the movie like that? It's just mean.
The Bob Thurman podcast is brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla membership community and listeners like you, and is distributed through a Creative Commons No Derivatives license. Please feel free to share, like, and post on your favorite social media platform. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.